Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in front of Sir Ratanji Tata's house in London, York House. It's in Twickenham, this district to the west of London. This building, it currently serves as offices for Richmond Borough Council. So I don't want to go too much into the particulars of the house, but it was constructed around 1630. Now, there are several edifices in the United Kingdom styled York House, usually because it's an erstwhile residence of the Archbishop of York or indeed the Duke of York. This one's not, because it was a local landowner and the family, their surname was York with an E on the end. And the chap who purchased it just gave that name to the house. He wasn't a York himself, I forget his name, one of Charles I's consiglieri. It's obviously been extensively reworked in almost 400 years of its standing hard by the Thames. The River Thames is just on the other side. I'll go further forward, give you an idea of the scale of it, but it was owned by various other distinguished personages. Just trying to think who else. Well, the Earl of Clarendon, not the author of the Great Rebellion, but his son, who was therefore uncle of Mary II and Queen Anne. Lord Elphinstone, I think the son of a Viceroy of India, owned it, and others. But on to Sir Ratanji Tata, who was born in India in 1853, if memory serves, in Mumbai. And the Parsis, they'd been living mostly in Gujarat for centuries, whence they had fled from Persia when the Mohammedans started to persecute them. Their precious few Zoroastrians or Parsis left in Persia. Of course, their name Parsi is a derivative of Persian. So then Bombay, as it was called back in those days, started to be the major hub for commerce in South Asia. So they tend to be very canny as traders and almost never engaged in agriculture. So Rajan, he and his brother inherited a huge patrimony when they were young men, and they were ever mindful of that maximum Parsi, thy name is charity. So they gave very liberal endowments to various things, various education institutions in India and indeed in the United Kingdom. And indeed in his bequest, he left a lot of his chattels to what was then the Prince of Wales Museum in Mumbai. Now, his proper name these days, I can't quite remember. It's something like Chattapatri. I've been into it, but that is many moons ago. So he married a Parsi lady, but they were never blessed with progeny. He adopted the child of a distant relative. So he came here, and his family's involved in Tata Steel. He helped build a water supply in the Western Ghats for Mumbai, and that helped to generate hydroelectricity for Mumbai in time. Obviously, it's called Bombay until 1998. The Portuguese Bombaia, as in good bay, as well as Bahia in Brazil, meaning just bay, or the bomb cathedral in Goa. Not it's an explosive bomb, but BOM, meaning good in Portuguese. So he was very anglicised. He spoke absolutely fluent English. He'd studied in Mumbai. He helped found the Indian Institute of Sciences. So he was noticed for giving these handsome donations to all sorts of worthy causes. And he even founded some department at the London School of Economics, which was founded around about 1895 by, is it the Webbs? Is it Sydney and Beatrice Webb? And it was popular with South Asian students even back in the 1930s. Feroz Varun Gandhi, as in the husband of Indira Gandhi, he studied there at that time. And it's very popular with Britons of Asian extraction to this day. So he was knighted in 1916, partly for his pro-war activism, so that minuscule minority, the Parsis, had wealth just far beyond their numbers in Hindustan, and many of them came over to this country. So they felt they had to look to the British Raj as their protectors. They didn't want to upset it, although they managed never to be persecuted by anybody in India, either Muslim or Hindu. Wasn't sure that was going to be the case when they, if independence came. People might be covetous of their wealth. Anyway, so although he adopted the child of a distant relative as his son, I think filiation wasn't recognised for the purpose of his knighthood, or it was a baronetcy, so it didn't pass on to his son anyway. So he sailed to India in the middle of the First World War, possibly a foolhardy thing to do, but his ship sank, though it wasn't actually torpedoed, sank in the ordinary course of events, but he survived that. He came back here and he died at St Ives, which is the most extreme point of land in England, southwest England, well, almost in the county of Cornwall. But his body was brought to Brookwwood Cemetery, which I've been to, and interred there because, of course, Parsis, people often erroneously call them fire worshippers, they have got an unusual way of disposing of the mortal remains of their kin. They would put them in these towers of silence and leave them to be picked clean by vultures. But they're not vultures in India these days, because there's some sort of medicine people give to cattle and the vultures eat those, and then it causes them to be ill and die. There isn't a sufficient population to devour the corpses of Parsis. They use huge, what are they called, mirrors to reflect the rays of the sun to make sure these cadavers shrivel up. But that's probably a bit too gruesome. But back to Sir Ratanji Tata. So is a very distinguished gentleman, admired both in his homeland and indeed this country. So he was a multi-millionaire in his lifetime. When back to what they do with their dead, the carcasses can't be buried because that would be dishonoring one of the elements, the earth, nor can it be cremated, that would be dishonoring the fire, and they gaze into the flame to ruminate on the infinite and Ahura Mazda, Lord Wisdom, their deity. They don't actually worship fire, that's a misnomer. And what else? Yeah, they can't be put into water because that would be defiling water. So that's why they're to be put in those towers of silence to be eaten by birds of prey. So we like to believe this is carrion for them. I'm sorry to say, it's probably more like rats and maggots get them, but somehow that seems dishonoring to certain people. So they were not allowed to have, I think it's called an endowment, a tower of silence in the United Kingdom. Therefore, they have to be interred in the ordinary manner. That's how most people were disposed of in this country until quite recent times, when cremation became more popular and cheaper. Anyway, I've been to Brookwwood Cemetery, which is perhaps 50 miles from here, and there's a special Parsi burial ground, and he's interred there in a mausoleum, very fine mausoleum, with other distinguished Parsis. So he was a distant cousin of, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct, Shivapuri Saklatvala, who was this Parsi communist who, if I got it right, was actually elected to Parliament for the Battersea constituency in 1922. Labour gave him a clear run, but he lost the next time, if I've got that right, because communism was seen to be all the rage amongst some of the advanced proletariat just after the First World War. People hadn't quite realised what horrors were going on in the infant Soviet Union back then. So I'll show you some of his gardens. Perhaps you're getting an idea of the scale of his house. Now, some of these buildings will be new, will not be original, and was there a tennis court in his time? I'm not quite so sure. So those buildings beyond those are just ordinary residential blocks of flats. They're not Sir Ratanji Tata's property, or his former property. And Tata is a huge conglomerate. It's a multinational these days. It's in the automotive industry and banking, chemicals, property, construction, and all sorts. So you see Tata trucks and cars all over India, named after the Tata family, so still going to this day. So the current Tatas are not descended from him. I don't know who the main dynasty is these days. So it was real prime property he had, and perhaps I should go and film his mausoleum, because I walked around that graveyard generally, but I wasn't specifically filming Sir Ratanji Tata's grave. Anyway, perhaps you're getting an idea of the scale of the place and just how wealthy he was, of the houses back in there. And it's almost overlooking old Father Thames, which wends its silvery way along eastwards towards the North Sea. So we're slightly sloping downhill, which means you're going waterward. More of the gardens here, which we shan't walk into. And there's a public right-of-way, a road there, and that's why there's a footbridge over it, so he could get from one part of his property to another, and the public right-of-way wouldn't be impeded. So this is the back of the house. Unfortunately, it's all under scaffolding for repair. People can get married here. You know, there's a registry office and various other bureaucratic things are going on. Rather less romantic, some of them. council tax, no doubt, because Twickenham was a separate borough to Richmond until, if memory serves, 1965, and then they amalgamated it. London used to have 85 boroughs, they're now 32. So then let's put 2 boroughs together, or even 3 boroughs together. So Twickenham was simply part of the borough of Richmond upon Thames, because the River Thames flows through it. Richmond upon Thames, to avoid confusion with Richmond, Virginia, Richmond in Yorkshire, Richmond, Dublin, or various other Richmonds around the world. So you've got the idea of how big his house is. A riverside playgroup. Yeah! Here there's this sunken garden. I'm not sure, why would you dig it down? Might want to raise it up. I mean, it would flood more easily. And there you can see the pedestrian bridge, because there's that public road which is a right of way. People hardly ever drive through it, they often walk through it. And there's a bit more of his garden on the other side of that little road. And then there's the River Thames just beyond. Yeah. The nearer a lot of trees, that is just in front of the Thames. And you can see some trees in the background. They are on the other side of the River Thames. We're on the north bank of the Thames. The other ones are on the south bank of the Thames. Okay, so if I go here, maybe you'll get an idea of the dimensions of York House. So that is Sir Ratanji Tata, sorely missed, who died just over 100 years ago. And in the garden, there's this most magnificent 19th century neoclassical scene of what they called naiads and nymphs and so on, and various nubile water creatures leaping out of the fountain. But I think they were originally built in Italy, brought here and so on, fell into terrible disrepair, vandalised in the 1980s, then restored, but they're fenced off as they're still working on them, and they've got these twisting spikes so people don't try and wade through the water to get to that lovely scene. But I've filmed it before. So that is enough about Sir Ratanji Tata. So please follow me on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and book online lessons for me in history, politics, religious studies, citizenship, geography, law, French, anything of that nature. I translate from French, Spanish, Italian, German, Russian, Romanian. What else do I do? I'm a tour guide in London when tourism reopens one of these centuries, and I edit people's documents and I teach them elocution and interview practice. Right, toodle pip.